So do you want us to look this way or?
No, look, yeah, that's just, I mean.
Conversation stuff?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So, we'll just go ahead and, I don't know, you want to start over?
Okay, I can do that.
Okay, cool. So, thanks again for meeting with us and doing this video. I'd like you to introduce yourselves, please.
Okay. Well, I'm Reverend Sandra Simmons, and I'm a teacher in higher education, director of the Hush House Leadership and Training Institute, which my husband founded. We're the co-founders of the Training Institute, and he's the founder of the museum. And we've been here since mid-90s, and happily to say that we're growing and excited about growing here in Detroit, and we're both native Detroiters as well.
I'm Bobby Charles, or Professor Charles Simmons, or in the neighborhood of Uncle Charles. I'm on the faculty at Eastern Michigan University and long-term activist in Detroit on issues of all types of social justice and peace, and a media person dealing with local and global media. So I'm really delighted to have had the meeting with Cindy and to have been able to make some comparisons between the type of struggle that she's involved in and the type of things we're doing here in Detroit.
And that's a perfect segue, because that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I understand that Detroit has been kind of a frontline city for many, many years as far as dealing with oppressive political structures and economic and physical infrastructure collapse and that kind of thing. And so I'd like to ask you, you know, what that's been like and where you're at today.
Well,
you want to start?
Okay. Well, you know, absolutely, we began earlier than most of the country in terms of the struggle. But as Malcolm X said so rightly, the chickens came to roost here in Detroit long before they did over the rest of the country, but the country is beginning to feel the impact of what's happening. We were designated by the powers that be, particularly the multinational corporations who mask themselves as predatory foundations and other big business, that they want Detroit. Detroit, of course, has this international border. We have this waterway. We're very appealing on so many levels. And so they began the process back in the mid-90s of dismantling us. And they started by attacking our schools, taking away our vote. It was unheard of where a city votes for elected officials, and then they turned over our vote because it wasn't in line with what they were planning to do. And we began to see that process of our rights being eroded, and that's certainly what has happened. To the place now, they have created a paramilitary force here in Detroit that's unlike any place except Washington, D.C., where state, local, and national, because you have the federal government involved, the FBI, and Homeland Security, have created a particular force they call Detroit One, and they've deputized private companies like the ones at Henry Ford Hospital and Carmano Center, for instance, and they've set them loose on Detroiters. And what Dave Bing, our mayor, puppet mayor, who is clearly run by multinational corporations, he began to say early on, they're right-sizing Detroit. That was literally what he called it until they said it's bad publicity, so they changed the name. But he's on record of calling right-sizing Detroit, meaning working class and poor people are being dismantled, destabilized. Their communities have been taken over, in some cases burned down completely. You would hear it reported on news as if people were setting their own homes afire, which is absolutely ridiculous. Some neighborhoods who've been in effect for over 100 years disappeared during this transition. You could come out of your house after being in 2 days and a whole neighborhood was gone. can you imagine a whole community being set ablaze? And now we know, true, that this was done on purpose. The Hans Farms guy, he took up lots of that property. Now it's his, in pretending as if he's going to do urban gardening when in fact we know it's all about making some money. They're taking our island, which is Belle Isle, and there's been talk of creating their own special utopia for the ultra-rich and creating a bank where there's going to be offshore banking because the island sits in what's called international waters because it borders Canada. So poor people in Detroit, we've maintained all of these jewels like the GIA, our arts and culture, because it's very important to people here, and our educational system, where, for instance, we just had a brand new school, or schools built. For instance, it cost us $1 million to build. If you can believe in this economy, people of Detroit suffered and sacrificed because our children are that important to us. But if you read the news, we hate our children. We disrespect our communities, and yet we funded that. And they sold our brand new schools for $1 to the state, so the state could take it over and create its own so-called charter schools, which is dismantling the public schools. So this onslaught, what's happening in Detroit, the likes has not been seen in the United States, but it has been seen all over the globe, especially in Africa, and we see, of course, in the Middle East. These are the same kinds of tactics that are now being deployed on Americans.
All right, act to follow.
But I know you will. But I know you will.
You know, Detroit has something similar to a third world type of economic system, where, like in some of the third world countries, they have one crop that they export for their sustenance. Mm-hmm. And Detroit has one crop, basically the auto industry. And so when that industry collapses, mm-hmm. or has a bust or a boom, then it has a major impact on just the quality of life or the survival of both working people in the city, mm-hmm. and in the region, because it's not just Detroit, it's all the Southeast Michigan, mm-hmm. much of the whole post-industrial area in this region. We've been accustomed to having busts and booms about 150 years since the Industrial Revolution here. And we went from producing different types of things. Before we had the automobile, we manufactured bicycles, we manufactured railroad cars, we manufactured parts for ships. Then we got into the auto production in the early 1900s. But each time there was a transition from one type of production to another, there was a major economic crisis. In addition to that, during the auto industry, the heyday of the auto industry, there was bust and boom within that economy, because every time there was a changeover from one type of automobile to another, the new models, workers were off for maybe 2 months, and they became accustomed to that. But those were considered normal among the people who at least were working. But over the past 30 years at least, we've been into a major crisis from which there was no escape, as in the past. And so none of the normal remedies under capitalism have worked for us. And then on top of that, beginning in 2007, with the national and international crisis that the entire country has been experiencing, this took us down to at least the 1929 era of the Great Depression. Our unemployment in our community, in our working and poor communities, has been, 50%. That, in this neighborhood, I mean, most people don't work. The only economy we have is the underground economy. Most of the poor communities. Most of the young people, if they're doing anything to have an income, it's in the underground economy. And that's the norm. And so we are basically outside of the economic system, and we're outside of the democratic process. So we have not been accustomed to experiencing anything of the democratic nature since the Coleman Young administration. And that was for the period of one mayor. Because he was a pro-democratic championed. You know, he fought for desegregation in the reality, and he fought for democratic rights for working people. But we haven't had, he's been dead now for 10, 15 years. And so we begin to move backwards politically with the various mayors and people on the city council who are just following the neoliberal, that is, accepting the dictates of big capital, which said that we had to bust the trade unions, eliminate contracts, eliminate pensions, eliminate the regular wages, so-called minimum wages, create two-tier type of contracts for where young people coming into the industry basically make half or less than whatever the old workers
No
make.
benefits.
And that has, and so in accompanying that, there's been a decrease in the access to power for working people. We have voted for various things we wanted, such as educational schools, and that whatever we voted for, they found ways to circumvent whatever we wanted. And now they've reached the point where we actually have no functioning city council nor mayor, and they just have a corporate person running the city. And the governor is talking about expanding that throughout the state. So we're in a position of absolute loss of whatever democracy we had. And of course, what the people who really had democracy before that were the middle class, people who were solidly middle class and upper class. They had access to power. Most working people never had it. So today we're struggling with dealing with fundamental economic rights for survival and fundamental democratic rights that many people around the country think that they have already. So we have to now find new ways of struggle, not only to restore what we had, but to actually go further than capitalism, and create a new economic system and political system that actually benefits, that satisfies needs of working people throughout this region, and ultimately it's going to be a problem for workers throughout the nation. And we don't think that the problems that we're facing now can be resolved by what has been the normal remedies of just having summer employment for young people to keep them from rebelling. Temporary this, temporary that, putting band-aids on the system. And so we have a cancer here that can't be resolved by band-aids. And so we're calling upon the activists now to think in new ways, both in establishing relationships with people. Let's say people who are dealing with the environment need to be working with people who are dealing with health issues, need to be working with labor. Across the board, everybody that's dealing with some type of issue needs to be working together to deal with the big monster, my wife calls it. And so in thinking about that, we've had to think about new concepts of work. What are we going to do that's going to replace this big corporate system of providing income? And so those are the types of things that we have to do now, looking forward to nation building in a new era that looks forward to establishing positive relationships with other people in other countries, because we experience the same so-called austerity that they're experiencing in Europe. And we have to establish supportive networks for people in South America and in Africa and Asia, people who are facing the same problems around the globe. And that is the solution for the path to establishing a peaceful planet and a productive planet where we won't have terrorism, so we won't need to spend $1 trillion for homeland security. And we won't have to have a prison industrial complex, which cannot solve our problems anyway. So those are some of the things we're looking at, how to build nation building and community building locally and globally.
And to recognize, to teach people, which is one of our missions here, to teach people that nation building begins at the community level. It begins at the roots. Now, what people consider to be grassroots community building, capacity building, is not the same. We've sort of lean to this idea of having these corporate foundations who were supposed to be the helpers who've now turned into predators. Literally here in Detroit, it's a really good read. We need to pay attention to some of your larger foundations who lost their money just like everybody else did, and who are now being funded by Wall Street. And so Wall Street has its cover to look like a foundation, and the foundations are acting very predatory. And so they're supporting the takeover of poor and working poor folks, taking over the geography of their community. So, for instance, like you would have here in this community, which has been renamed Midtown, without any people's consent. And then you have this corporation like this hospital, this local hospital, that who in their own trade magazines, Henry Ford Hospital, you'll look them up and they'll say, come to Detroit, we'll pay you $20,000 to come and live in this great upcoming area. But in the local papers they're sitting, oh, it's awful down there, we must do something, we need more security, we need more force. And so theirs was one of the security companies that got deputized that can come in. Can you imagine a security company for a hospital can come into your neighborhood and arrest somebody?
What?
Because they've been deputized by the state, by the federal government. Your children can be walking down the street and be arrested by a multiplicity of departments all at one time. So your child could walk away or be arrested on a federal count because that's what they decide to do. And they've got a plan where they can fast track. They've got a judge they can call right away, fast track, and they reopened a old prison, and now they call it a detention center. So we have our own Guantanamo right here. So they can pick your children. So this intimidation that's happening here, how do we overcome? The people want to know why is it that Detroit, and they can't figure out, why haven't we folded? Why won't we give up? And that's because we have the backbone of having grown up from our history from coming from the Deep South and migrating here during a particular time in history fortifies us. And the fact that there is this sense of community. So when you come, like you came here to, this is literally what they're calling one of the worst sections of Detroit here, in this community, where, yeah, they're telling people, be afraid, don't go in that area. Well, they don't want you to come here because they don't want you to see really what they're doing, how they're raping the community, how they're burning down houses and have knocked down blocks, because they have their own intention, because they want their employees. They have a whole model of, we've got the maps of how they're redesigned this community for their people, which includes no people of color. It includes white folk, young people, people that they want to be here, and so they want to move out everybody else, and they're doing it. And you drive down, you see large tracts of land where houses used to be. Some of those houses were 100 years old. So, and no respect to the health or welfare of any folks. But what we propose is that we create a new system of community, which we're calling developing communities of compassion and regions of refuge. So within these regions, we see dividing up, and this is for, we're setting up models so that as everything we do at Hush House, so others can emulate these models. And so this is a model of community where you divide any geography up into regions of refuge, and this idea, this is a place, you messed up over here, but now you're ready to do better and be better. And you come to this region where we build develop relationships between churches and nonprofits and people who are interested in joining together. And in one region, you'll build up things like everything you need for children from 0 to 5 years old, and that community will collect all of those things. And in another region, everything you need for seniors, whether it's health care, medical care, mental health services, living so people can live differently. And we're teaching skills like how to barter, how to exchange, how to unpack each other, because we realize that each one of us, we are the treasure, we are the wealth. And so if we unpack your skill set and my skill set, maybe we only have a few pennies between us, but we have an awesome skill set. And so when we unpack each other, everything we need, we have. And we learn how to barter again and how to exchange our services again. We grow our own food because we know that the government has literally been cutting people off of food stamps. Why in the world do you need to cut off food stamps for women and children and people who need them. But purposely, for instance, in this community, corporate folks were going around with pads and they took people's addresses and they ran their numbers. And if you had, when you have a community where 61% of the households are single women with children and 10% are single men with children, and if you're receiving any kind of aid, they cut them off. And then what happens is that you cut them off and you lose electricity, and they tied electricity and gas together. So now, if you're in a house with no gas and electricity, that means your children are at jeopardy. 1 year, what was that, about 2 years, 3 years ago, when DTE went and did all these mass cutoffs, and they cut off 20,000 homes, and all of these children were destabilized and went into foster care.
And then they attach that debt to your property tax, and if you don't pay it, they take your house.
You got about 8 minutes left on that.
It is a racket.
It's a racket.
It is. It's all actually.
So, but we can, the good news is that we can create a new type of an economy, a new type of capacity building that puts not only does it bring a different economy into the culture, but it also gives us this new political autonomy. Gives us the opportunity to consider and to build new types of political awareness and choose how we want to vote. Maybe even create, people have been talking to us about creating a new party altogether. And that kind of region, the regional idea that we will build and help understand that this region, not only does it doesn't stop in Detroit, but it extends to wherever else. And so now we connect them. And we have a new national opportunity to reset. But it starts from the roots up.
Indeed. Speaking of roots, that's a pretty good spot to move to. The community gardens that we observed today were looks like they were both working gardens, and they were pretty well developed. The first one, I understand, is producing like $1 million a year worth of food, and it's feeding the neighborhood and powering school lunches and that kind of thing. I think it's right next to a soup kitchen. The Capuchin. Yeah. And so seeing that as part of this whole thing is, we have a long haul to make all the transition that we've got to make, but in the meantime, building the means for survival during that time it's also fueling the revolution as it goes, because of adapting the new skills and ideas, and it all works together. And it's been very very enlightening and very hopeful to see so many communities that are grabbing onto this kind of thing.
Yeah, I want to say something about the Capuchin. I've done a little volunteer work there also. They hire homeless people to actually work in the gardens, and they feed the homeless people in the kitchen. And they say it's called a soup kitchen, but they actually give complete meals to people twice a day, every day of the week. And they come from not only that particular neighborhood, they come from all over the city to eat over there.
Wow.
And so and they have a large greenhouse, as you've seen, in a hot house. So they have those plants growing all year round. And so that is a model that needs to be replicated throughout the country for communities. I mean, every church, every school, every community center needs to have a greenhouse and a hot house. So we don't have to depend on this industrial food complex with all its toxic chemicals and everything to try to feed us. We need to be feeding ourselves.
Have you found that there is any significant obstacle to establishing these gardens as of yet, or is it like I mean, I know that the one Heinz Farm has been buying up a lot of land, but in other ways, have there been problems? Have they tried to regulate people out of it, or?
We're already hearing about moves that are taken, because if people have had these gardens going on quote-unquote city land, they should have gotten first rights to purchase it, but the city council have been bought out. There's some people on the city council who are clearly been bought out by the corporate entities. They're refusing the community rights to buy the property in their own community first. I mean, they were like $50, $100 a lot. And so they'll boost up the price, or they'll tell them that it's already been, because people from out of state even have come and they're paying taxes. People found out that folks have paid taxes on their houses as they're behind, in a way to take them from them. So yeah, the move is already on to destabilize the farms, to destabilize the communities. But as we said, we do want you to check out Malik Yakini's work with the Black Food Security Network, which is
D-Town Farms.
D-Town Farms, very powerful entity, and he's done a lot of work in order to link us together to be able to fight these corporate entities. But again, the answer lies in the fact that we have to realize that the most revolutionary thing we can dare to do is to love each other. To say, I choose to love you. And you know, I don't have to agree with everything you do. I really don't. But at the end of the day, if we agree one thing, if we agree that we love our children, period, that is a place that we can grow from. That is a place where we can build communities of compassion. That is a place from which we can build our communities. That is a way that we can turn this thing around, because see, corporations don't have a soul. They may have the same rights as us, but they don't have the capacity to love. And that is the greatest fuel for any revolution. If we dare to love, we can make it, we can change the world. We certainly can change America.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sitting with me today. Is there anything you'd like to bring up besides that? Because that was a really good spot to end.
Well, we got 2 minutes left.
Okay, well then I guess that's...
Well, I don't know if you can edit this without before my wife's last statement, but on the issue of the land, you know, we're sitting on land that was stolen from the Native Americans in the first place.
Sure.
And so the struggle for land has been a continuous struggle, and we talk about gentrification now, but that's still a continuum of the land struggle. That's grabbing land from the people in the Amazon all the way to Zanzibar. So nobody's safe from that. Corporations want the land, you have a big fight. So it's now a major fight for just simply to have food, and that's a big war. That's a global war of food that we're facing now in the cities.
So we shall live and not die.
There you go. All right. Thank you again so much.
You're so welcome, brother. Peace and blessings.